Hey, second grade, Miss Shannon here to introduce our genre of the week. This week, we are going to be reading informational text, specifically narrative nonfiction. Remember that nonfiction or informational means it is real, true information. Let's go ahead and look at the 3 things that a narrative nonfiction story has. A narrative nonfiction story tells about living things, people, or events. It also includes text features such as headings, bold print, photographs and captions, diagrams, maps, and even timelines. Narrative nonfiction is told by a narrator and follows a sequence, meaning it might tell the story in order or by chunks about different topics. Let's talk more about text features. Here are some examples. Headings. Headings tell what a section of text is mostly about. So in this example, you can see the heading says break time. I know that the rest of that paragraph is going to be about the people in the story taking a break, what they do on their break time. I also see words that are bolded, which means their text is a little bit thicker or darker than the words around it. That is called bold print. These words are important to understanding the text, meaning it's an important vocabulary word to know and understand in order to know what you're reading about. So those are some examples of text features you might see in narrative nonfiction. Headings and bold print. Today, we are going to work on page 77 in our Your Turn practice book. So if you do not have it, go find your practice book now and turn to page 77. Your page should look like this, titled In the Cave. Okay, second graders, I'm going to read this page out loud to you, and then we will answer the questions together. In the cave. The scientist enters the cave. It is cold and dim. She spies shrimp and cave beetles. These animals never leave the cave. Then she sees a snail. It may leave the caves at times. And I see a chart, which is a text feature. The chart is labeled Cave Animals. And I see there are 2 columns to this chart. The first column says, always live in caves. Cave shrimp, cave beetle, and cave fish. Those are 3 types of animals that always live in the caves. In the other side of our table, it says sometimes live in caves. Snail, spider, and worm. So sometimes those animals live in the cave, but other times they leave the cave. So I think this narrator told me about a scientist entering a cave, describing what the cave looked like, and the animals that might live in the cave. We learned about 2 different types of animals. Animals that always live in a cave, and animals that sometimes live in a cave. I think we're ready to move on to the comprehension questions. Remember that we're always thinking about the genre. This is an informational text, more specifically, a narrative nonfiction text. Answer the questions about the text. Number 1, how can you tell that this text is narrative nonfiction? Well, second graders, let's go back to this page. Did our story tell about living things, people, or events? Yes, it did. It told us about a scientist exploring a cave and the types of animals that live in a cave. Did it include text features such as headings, bold print, photographs and captions, diagrams, maps, and timelines? Let's take a look. I see bolded words and I see a table. Those are both examples of text features that we have in this text. Last, it's a story that is told by a narrator and follows a sequence. That means this story was not told by the scientist who entered the cave, rather told by someone else writing about the scientist entering the cave. And it told us about the animals that lived there, so it followed an order or a sequence. Number 2, what happens after the scientist sees shrimp and cave beetles? Well, second graders, I can't remember off the top of my head. It's always important to go back into the text and find our answer. What happens after the scientist sees shrimp and cave beetles? Let's go check. I see there is where she sees shrimp and cave beetles. The next few sentences will tell me what happens next. She spies shrimp and cave beetles. These animals never leave the cave. All right, that was about shrimp and cave beetles. What I read next will tell me what the scientist did next. Then she sees a snail. So, second graders, what did she do after she saw a shrimp and cave beetle? That's right, she saw a snail. Number 3, why are shrimp, cave beetles, and snail in bold print? Why do you think they're in bold print? That's right, they are important vocabulary words to understanding the story. They are the animals that live in the cave. And number 4, what information can you get from the chart? Here's our chart. This chart told us the types of animals that live in caves. Some of them live in there all the time, and other animals only live in there sometimes. But this chart told us the animals that live in caves, which is why the title of the chart is useful, titled Cave Animals. All right, second graders, after I've talked through our questions, you can look below this video to find a finished example. I hope you enjoyed learning about narrative nonfiction with me. The other stories we'll be reading this week will also be narrative nonfiction, so it's important to remember that narrative nonfiction tells about living things, people, or events, includes text features, and is told by a narrator. Thanks for working with me, second graders, and remember to complete page 77.